and thank you very much for coming along once again. This evening we want to look at a really important problem that's starting to come up, and that is how to sort out, in all the media that you're hearing, the difference between truth-sayers and soothsayers. We're confronted with both in the media, and it's problematic, especially if you haven't spent a lot of time looking at it, to figure out who is in fact talking truth and who is trying to just smooth things over and speak to power what power wants to hear. The soothsayers. Kings and empires of every description in all of human history, especially the elites around the courts, have sought to surround themselves with soothsayers, people who tell them what they want to hear. But what the public needs to know is, who are the truthsayers? And it's not at all clear that it is the elites around those in power. In fact, they may well be outside of the power structure altogether, and quite often in minor social roles or youth. Children see things far more clearly than adults because they haven't learned to filter out what's said to be impossible or not appropriate. They can see it and say it directly, and we're beginning to see this very clearly in reference to the climate issue, because it's the youth that are the truth-sayers. Very different from the soothsayers. We can see it in a number of different contexts, but we want to recognize that this is a struggle for a credible narrative of the human prospect. That is to say, do you have a story that makes sense in reference to what is about to happen to the human community? If you do, you're a truthsayer. If you're just repeating what you've heard before, or what people in positions of high office are accustomed to hearing and want to hear more of, then you're a soothsayer. And you're in the presence of soothsayers that do that. Well, we've had some pretty incredible demonstrations in the last few months of both truthsayers and soothsayers. One of the amazing truthsayers in the English language for all time, and especially in the modern moment, has been Sir David Attenborough, a long-standing naturalist, and at this point a really outspoken statesman for the preservation of life on Earth. Take a look at what he said to the Conference of Parties in Poland in December.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon. The United Nations provides a unique platform that can unite the whole world. And as the Paris Agreement proved, together we can make real change happen. The world's people have spoken. Their message is clear. Time is running out. They want you, the decision makers, to act now. They're behind you, along with civil society represented here today, supporting you in making tough decisions, but also willing to make sacrifices in their daily lives. To help make change happen, the United Nations is launching the Act Now bot, helping people to discover simple everyday actions that they can make, because they recognize that they too must play their part. The people have spoken. Leaders of the world, you must lead. The continuation of our civilizations and the natural world upon which we depend is in your hands. Thank you.
The Guardian carried that, and it went out to the world at large. Now, a very different kind of truth-sayer has been very dramatic in her action, but not said a whole lot. She demonstrated outside of the Parliament buildings in Sweden and said she wasn't going to go to school until they acted. She became very famous because many students joined her in her school strike, striking against going to school until the Swedish Parliament did something about it. She too showed up in Poland and made a speech. Take a look.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am 15 years old and I'm from Sweden. I speak on behalf of climate justice now. Many people say that Sweden is just a small country and it doesn't matter what we do. But I've learned that you are never too small to make a difference. And if a few children can get headlines all over the world just by not going to school, then imagine what we could all do together if we really wanted to. But to do that, we have to speak clearly, no matter how uncomfortable that may be. You only speak of green, eternal economic growth because you are too scared of being unpopular. You only talk about moving forward with the same bad ideas that got us into this mess, even when the only sensible thing to do is pull the emergency brake. You are not mature enough to tell it like it is. Even that burden you leave to us children. But I don't care about being popular. I care about climate justice and a living planet. Our civilization is being sacrificed for the opportunity of a very small number of people to continue making enormous amounts of money. Our biosphere is being sacrificed so that rich people in countries like mine can live in luxury. It is the sufferings of the many which pay for the luxuries of the few. The year 2078, I will celebrate my 75th birthday. If I have children, maybe they will spend that day with me. Maybe they will ask me about you. Maybe they will ask why you didn't do anything while there still was time to act. You say you love your children above all else, and yet you are stealing their future in front of their very eyes. Until you start focusing on what needs to be done, rather than what is politically possible, there is no hope. We cannot solve a crisis without treating it as a crisis. We need to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, and we need to focus on equity. And if solutions within this system are so impossible to find, then maybe we should change the system itself. We have not come here to beg world leaders to care. You have ignored us in the past and you will ignore us again. We have run out of excuses and we are running out of time. We have come here to let you know that change is coming, whether you like it or not. The real power belongs to the people. Thank you.
The real power belongs to the people. Well, Sir David went on from Katowice in Poland, the Conference of Parties meeting, to Davos 2 months later, actually just a month later, and made the case there as well. Take a look.
Global businesses, international cooperation and the striving for ideals, these are all possible because for millennia, on a global scale, nature has been largely predictable and stable. Now, in the space of one human lifetime, indeed, in the space of my lifetime, all that has changed. The Holocene has ended. The Garden of Eden is no more.
The Garden of Eden is no more. The Anthropocene is the current geologic epoch. And these people realize it, these truth-sayers. Whether they're old or young, their focus is on the ecosystem and human survival within it. Take a look.
16-year-old Swedish climate activist Greta Thunberg has arrived in Davos, Switzerland, where she's calling on heads of state and global elites gathered for the World Economic Forum to take urgent action on climate change. Ahead of her trip to the forum, Thunberg posted a video online accusing corporate and government leaders of essentially doing nothing to prevent a climate catastrophe.
The climate crisis is something that we all have created. But that is just another convenient lie. Because if everyone is guilty, then no one is to blame. And someone is to blame. Some people, some companies, and some decision makers in particular has known exactly what priceless values they are sacrificing to continue making unimaginable amounts of money. I want to challenge those companies and those decision makers into real and bold climate action, to set their economic goals aside and to safeguard the future living conditions for humankind. I don't believe for 1 second that you will rise to that challenge, but I want to ask you all the same. I ask you to prove me wrong.
Greta Thunberg made international headlines last year after she launched a one-day-a-week school strike against climate change, held every Friday outside the Swedish parliament. The school strike quickly spread and became a global phenomenon.
And the global phenomena went not only throughout Europe, but out down to Australia as well. Now, these are the same themes raised by Severin Suzuki back in 1992. 27 years ago, but they've not been responded to. Others have been pointing out that there is a pressing danger. People like Bill McKibben, been valiant journalists in this regard and reached a great many people. Others in the scientific community may joke about it for a while, but they're trying to figure out new ways to explain the urgency to the public so that it can understand. So they appear on CSNBC and others, and in effect, they're nowhere near matching the urgency and compelling truth-saying of Greta and her kids, as they're now being referred to. Greta influenced Belgian students to join in a strike against their school. Take a look.
A record 30,000 school children and students swamped Brussels city centre, braving the rain and snow to demand action on climate change. They're using the only leverage they have, school attendance, to urge leaders to act. It's the third week in a row that students have skipped class to protest, and it's the biggest crowd yet.
Biggest crowd yet, pointing out that there is no economy on a dead planet. Extinction's not good for business. Students have skipped school as well in Melbourne, Australia, being affected by the call of this 16-year-old now student from Sweden. Scott Morrison, the PM Prime Minister, scolded them all, told them to get back to school.
This Friday, many thousands of students across the country will go on strike from school, calling for emergency action on climate change. These brave and courageous kids are joining young people around the world who are angry at the failure of governments, including yours, to secure their future from global warming. Will you meet with and listen to these kids who are demanding action from your government to keep coal in the ground?
Mr Speaker, climate change is a very real and serious issue which demands the attention of governments at all levels, and it has the attention of this government. But I'll tell you what we're also committed to. Kids should go to school. That's what we're committed to. We don't support the idea of kids not going to school to participate in things that can be dealt with outside of school. We do not support our schools being turned into parliaments, Mr. Speaker. What we want is more learning in schools and less activism in schools.
What we want is more learning in school and less activism. More learning and less activism. Oh yeah, that's rich. Just wait till the adults catch up with what the students have already learned. In fact, the students have said, we've done our homework. People like Greta, in effect, have done the homework. To go back to school and learn what they should learn is that it's already too late for them. The adults have permanently committed, with the use of fossil fuels, the future to a devastating outcome that they will not survive. Scott Morrison is telling kids to go back to school, but what if they actually listen to other journalists?
I was on the tube the other day and I saw the posters for the book. The Uninhabitable Earth, coming soon. It's a terrifying message, even in the advert itself. This is a scary book. Are you trying to scare us? And if so, why?
Yeah, that's one of the purposes of the book, but my main impulse is really just to tell the truth. So when I started digging into climate change science 2 or 3 years ago, I saw a great gap between the news from the academic research and the way that that story was being told in the media. Things were much scarier when I talked to academics off the record, when I talked to scientists off the record, than they appeared to be reading newspapers and watching television. There were sort of 3 main divergences. One was about the speed of change. We had been sort of led to believe that climate change was quite slow, that it would only be coming decades down the road, maybe centuries down the road. In fact, more than half of all of the emissions that we've put into the atmosphere from the burning of fossil fuels have come in the last 25 years, so we're really doing this damage very much in real time. We were also kind of confused about the scope of the threat, which is to say we understood sea level rise and were worried about that, but we didn't understand how it would be impacting life far from the coastline in terms of economic growth, in terms of agricultural yield, in terms of wildfires even. A few years ago we hadn't really thought about these factors. And we also were misguided about the possible severity of the challenge, which is to say most scientists understood 2 degrees of warming as the threshold of catastrophe. That's what they talked about. And that meant that the public understood 2 degrees as sort of a ceiling for what was possible with warming, and in fact functionally it's about a floor. We're on pace for about 4 degrees of warming, which would be, by the end of the century, which would be truly, truly catastrophic. And I saw a big gap between what the science said on each of those points and the way that the story was being told to the public, and I wanted to share that information from the science with them. So that was my first main impulse, was just to tell the story. And my impulse, I'm a journalist, and my main imperative is truth-telling, and to share the facts as I understand them. And I do think the book does that. But as I've written it, I've also become, as anybody does when they write about climate, sit with climate, a bit of a kind of quasi-activist, quasi-advocate. It's hard to look at this subject and not feel compelled to action. And so I also began thinking about how I was writing in regard to efficacy and in regard to messaging. And many scientists and their sort of colleagues in the press have often worried about this issue of whether writing an alarmist version of the facts, writing that kind of text, writing that kind of piece, runs the risk of alienating people, pushing people into fatalism, pushing people into despair, when in fact what we need is a much more engaged, active audience. And I think there are some people for whom that is true, who are at risk of falling into fatalism and despair. But when I look around the world, when I talk to my colleagues, when I talk to my family, when I just walk down the street every day, it seems so transparently the case to me that complacency is a much bigger problem than fatalism.
Right. Complacency is a much bigger problem than fatalism. And why? Well, because we have figures like this making statements like this that are really quite amazing. He boasts of expanding production and reducing.
My administration has cut more regulations in a short period of time than any other administration during its entire tenure. refugees are coming back to our country in large numbers, thanks to our historic reductions in taxes and regulations. And we have unleashed a revolution in American energy. The United States is now the #1 producer of oil and natural gas anywhere in the world.
He's taking credit for that, and he likes it. I mean, he's bragging about it. It's pretty amazing. He's boasting of repealing U.S. environmental regulations and expanding oil production. Now, you got to ask yourself if this is a recipe for stability, for continuity, for survival. Well, he's got other plans. He plans to have another study. Is this credible or simply incredible? Take a look.
We spend the rest of the hour on the climate crisis, following reports that the White House is organizing a new committee to examine whether climate change poses a threat to national security. Efforts to form the panel, named the Presidential Committee on Climate Security, are being led by Princeton University Professor Emeritus and Trump science advisor William Happer, a physicist and known climate change denier. Observers say his involvement indicates the Trump administration wants to undermine findings within the national security community that climate change poses a severe threat to human safety. William Happer is a National Security Council senior director who's long claimed increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will actually benefit humans.
Well, that's pretty extraordinary. That's certainly a minority point of view. The increasing of CO2 will actually benefit humans. This is the man that the president is calling upon as his science advisor. Greta Thunberg responds.
Thank you very much indeed to the presidents sitting here. It's now my great pleasure. Could I please ask everyone to sit down again? I know there's a great deal of excitement. We have some very important people here, including Greta Thunberg, the one and only Greta. Greta? Greta, may I ask you now please to come to the lectern and give us your insights. Please could you help Greta get to the lectern, please? The floor is yours, Greta.
My name is Greta Thunberg. I am a climate activist from Sweden. And today in this room there's also, if you can come up, Anuna, Adelaide, Kira, Gilles, I don't know how to pronounce it, but Dries, Toon and Louisa. Tens of thousands of children are school striking for the climate on the streets of Brussels. Hundreds of thousands are doing the same all over the world. We are school striking because we have done our homework. And some of us are here today. People always tell us that they are so hopeful. They are hopeful that the young people are going to save the world. But we are not. There is simply not enough time to wait for us to grow up and become the ones in charge. Because by the year 2020, we need to have bended the emissions curve steep downwards. That is next year. We know that most politicians don't want to talk to us. Good. We don't want to talk to them either.
Good. we don't want to talk to them either. She's beyond that point. And you have to start realizing that there are truth-sayers and there are soothsayers, and the younger generation doesn't find what's coming out of the mouths of their leaders as credible in any respect as a narrative for the future of the human prospect. Fortunately, a new kind of citizen science alliance is emerging around the world for a just transition to a sustainable future.